He is the most powerful who has power over himself.
Berserk shows you darkness from the start. It starts with a very ominous text about humankind being controlled by something higher, maybe a god, thus right away setting a philosophical tone to the show. So let's halt right there for a bit. How often do you think about God? Would you say that it and its powers is something worth considering in our world? Because such entities have been popular throughout human history, but in the last 100 years it has abruptly stopped being a fundamental pillar of human society. Berserk's world is one which appears to be forgotten and abandoned by higher powers. The protagonist Guts himself is born from the corpse of his mother amidst a hellish battlefield. Not a world of God, eh? Let me be clear. If you want a general overview of the story and its episodes, you can go and look for other uploaded videos on YouTube and then come back. This video here explains the depth of Berserk and its philosophical core. A thing that initially catches the eye of the viewer is the size of the Dragon Slayer, Guts' sword, which can cause such death and destruction because it is too heavy to be blocked. And not only that, but why does he have the body and willpower to wield it? Why is his one eye closed? Is it blinded? And then he has a reputation and is called the Black Swordsman, a name that is obviously associated with fear when it is spoken out loud. But then, probably the most interesting characteristic is that he has a seemingly demonic scar on his neck that pulsates and bleeds once spirits show to haunt him in the night. So you need to imagine that the show is presenting a dark silhouette and a known person from the start. When you add these strange and enticing characteristics one by one, the viewer begins to wonder what the backstory of all of this is. Well, if most characters in the show had one eye and the iron hand, then that trait would be common and not so interesting. It is a contrast that pulls people's attentions, as is in the real world. The strong muscular frame and the blindness shows that this man had survived something very dangerous, and we want to learn of it and from it. Guts also screams a name, Griffith, as he sees the haunting apparitions, which implicates that there is some type of hatred nested in his heart. The backstory is then presented during the Golden Age arc. We get attached to this kid named Guts that fares pretty well against big foes. Let me tell you about some famous sayings that the community has and explain them to you. Overall, people often identify with Guts and find him as an inspiration through edits, music, clips, etc. He is a symbolic figure for a struggle with something bigger than ourselves, as he is constantly fighting with larger opponents. It could be compared to David versus Goliath, where David doesn't see the gigantic size of Goliath in comparison to him, but keeps in mind the smallness of his opponent compared to God. That's why he defeats him. David had unbreakable faith. Something that is not showed or elaborated in the show is why Guts is such a good fighter. In the manga, he's born on the battlefield and fell out from the corpse of his hanging mother, to then be taken care of by merciless mercenaries. Now remember the philosophical God implications at the start. Guts is not David because he believes in God. It's actually quite the opposite. Guts strongly believes in himself. While others fear death, Guts thrives in those adrenaline-filled moments when they are faced by a fierce foe, they become timid. Guts just gets more and more intense. Ancient people sometimes believe that gods are possessing warriors to give them strength. Well, it is the same here with Guts, who seems to be overcome by the god of war. And that's why he needn't have faith in something higher outside of him. It already controls his individual body. His confidence lies in his very own self. It is almost as if a demigod is walking the earth. Well, that faith in oneself is helpful in being the best on the godless battlefield. But then what happens outside of it? Is it still helpful when adrenaline doesn't fill your body and quiet agony is all you have in mind? But before we get into the concept of nihilism and hopelessness, please like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. You have probably already heard about nihilism in association with Berserk. Nihilism is derived from Latin with nihil, meaning nothing. It is a belief that life is meaningless and knowledge is impossible. Think about it. We say God is good. We think God brings the good parts in this world and protects us from the bad. With a general worldview of godlessness in the time of the author of Berserk, Miura, nihilism is reflected in the show as well. Yes, something godly descends on the world later in the show, but until then, life is pretty grim for everybody, and especially Guts, whose powerful individualism has helped him combat all that is in front of him. Now, another name that is associated with Berserk is that of Friedrich Nietzsche, and he was quoted with saying,
The most spiritual people experience by far the most painful tragedies. But this is precisely why they honor life, because it provides them with their greatest adversities.
This quote becomes very relevant after the eclipse. I don't see Guts as quite faithless in something good. Otherwise he wouldn't be called a hero, or at least an anti-hero. He still acts within a frame of good deeds, and although he has lost himself in pure nihilism and violence before, he has found his way back on the path of something higher, partly because it is in his nature to be reflective about his soul. Griffith and Guts are very similar in their experiences, hence why they get along with each other. However, whilst Guts is disgusted by the abundant ugliness of the world, such as sexual assault, Griffith uses it to his advantage, which makes him evil, or non-distinctive between good and evil. Did Griffith do nothing wrong by sacrificing his comrades during the eclipse? The White Hawk lived by the worldly principles, and that's why he was accepted by the God Hand. Similar to how a person in our world would go to Valhalla or to heaven. And I truly think that the Berserk world presents an evil god so that the good in individuals, such as the protagonist, Guts, can shine through. Yes, Griffith did nothing wrong and acted in according manner to a world that is controlled by malevolent gods. Yet he was wrong on a more moral, individual and human level. To live with manipulative hatred in your heart, to sacrifice your closest people and to wrong a woman in the name of vengeance are not signs of a good person. All in all, Griffith and Guts' tale is a cautionary one of not falling in too deep into the hopeless abyss of evil. Griffith and Guts are similar in background, but complete contrasts of each other after the eclipse. The former turns into a demon to save himself at the cost of blood, discarded all that was good in his life for the sake of the future, and threw away his humanity. The latter sacrifices his own body and peace of mind, often trying to stay away from people as not to get them mixed up in his life, and fights against the tide of causality and never gives up in the face of bigger foes. Keep in mind that both were sexually abused. tortured, and psychologically scarred. But they each chose a different path. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant warned that we should not use a person as a mean to an end. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. It is a secret for a reason why Griffith is still alive and such a powerful being after the eclipse. Any reasonable person would feel negatively about the way how Griffith achieved his castle. His actions are neither just nor moral, but rather ambitious and prideful. Now if we go back to Guts' introduction and his sword and eye, we can point out some resemblances. Guts, being this unbeatable opponent up to the eclipse, becomes very vulnerable during it. His sword afterwards, the Dragon Slayer, is heavy and burdensome, but necessary. It is in a way Jesus' cross. Combined with Guts' sacrificial mark, it is a Christian symbol of pain and suffering and admitting weakness. It is quite literally carrying your own burdens. You can even compare it to Sisyphus, who pushed a boulder up a mountain, or Atlas, who balanced the world on his shoulders. Jesus was often tempted by the devil, but could always resist evil and move forwards. Well, he was the Son of God, something equivalent to Griffith in Berserk that fulfills the prophecy. Though here Guts is the symbolic Jesus, yet in a very human form. He is tempted and sometimes fails miserably. Oftentimes Guts fell into deep rage, bloodthirst, sexual impulses and radical hopelessness. However, at the end of the day he recovered. The demons were on his shoulder and he was not about to give in to them and let be devoured or transformed. Notice that in all instances, Jesus, Sisyphus, Atlas and Guts, their destiny is always punishment. The beautiful thing about it is that the goodness of people shines through in that predicament. The imperfect beings of any world, good or evil, in Berserk's or ours, have to pay the price, and the best are measured by their strength, courage and ability to withstand such punishment with grace and dignity. That's the profound psychological reason why Guts appears to be so interesting from the start. And then Guts losing an eye can be compared to Odin's myth, who searched for knowledge and wisdom but had to sacrifice half of his sight for it, a big price to pay. Guts had hoped to reach Griffith's stature, and he did just that, but in an unexpected way. So one has to always be careful what he wishes for, because it will be granted. Guts became the infamous Black Swordsman and the only mere human to be able to fight otherworldly giants, a feat which makes him legendary. Though to reach that point, he had to lose an eye and an arm in the eclipse. People say that ignorance is bliss because knowledge unveils the horrors of the truth. Guts, unlike almost any other, lived through the ritual of the eclipse and learned about what ruled the world, while having to become the strongest man alive, just to be able to survive and protect his loved ones. Odin also had to fight Fenrir, the wolf, similar to how Guts struggles against the beast of darkness. Fenrir is a representation of chaos and the forces of evil against the goodness and the order of the Aesir gods, whose king is Odin. Those symbolisms are the eternal cycles of light versus dark, hence why Berserk could be considered on par with mythological archetypal stories. So here we are, at the end of the video. Berserk is fun to watch, but difficult to fully digest. To explain the show is to sit down and analyze a lot of symbolisms and metaphors, which makes the story more profound and interesting. To summarize it in one sentence, Berserk is this. Berserk is the story of a destructive world that tempts one of its main characters to become its god and punishes its other protagonist. so that then they become the eternal metaphor of a cycle between good and evil, where themes such as hope, suffering, meaning, and humanity can be discussed.